Welcome to Where Do We Go From Here? I'm your host, Kim Kotis, and joining me today is Vern Plichta. And Vern is a Korean War veteran. And Vern, I'd like to welcome you to the show.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks for coming down. And tell us a little bit about your background, where you're from, and your experience in the Korean War.
Well, I was born in Heights Savannah Road, across from Beach School. And I went to, at 9th grade, I went to Muskegon Heights. And I graduated from Muskegon Heights High School in 1948. And I was kind of an athlete. I was a football player and a baseball player. And I was 18. I was the oldest of 7 kids. So when I was 18 in February, I got a job at Continental Motors. And that was 1948, between the Second World War and the Korean War. And I got a job on second shift. I went to school until 2 o'clock, and I went to work at 3:30. And I got out at 11:30, and I went home and went to school the next day again. And I no more got out of high school and I got laid off.
Oh my goodness.
And so I was laid off for a while. Then I went back to work to Continental, and I no more was working there. And then of January of '51, I went into the service. I was drafted. I went in January 15th, 1951. I went to Camp Polk, Louisiana, and took 16 weeks of training, come home on a 30-day furlough, and went right to Japan. It took us 31 days on the ship from California to Japan. 31 days. I was seasick the first 10 days. Every tooth in my head ached. They said we took the northern route, and I thought the ship was going to tip over, but we made it. We took 3 months of training in Japan, and when I got to Japan, I went from the infantry to driving a Jeep. And I ended up driving a Jeep. We went to Korea. We was there about 3 months in Japan. We went to Korea on Thanksgiving of 1951. And I was there, and I drove Jeep for the quartermaster. And so we went to see the general every morning, no matter where he was, on the front lines or in the rear a little ways. Then the colonel went home and on rotation, and I had a whole bunch of points, but we got drafted into the Oklahoma National Guard, the 45th Division. So the National Guard people had to all go home before we did. And my buddy, his name was Oosting, and so he went. My name was Plichta, so the O went home a month before the P did. So I got home in the end of November of 1952, and then I had my job waiting at Continental Motors, and I saved most of my money because when we were in Korea, there was nothing to spend money on, and we got free cigarettes and free candy bars, and we got six bottles of beer a month. And in the winter it was cold beer, and in the summer it was warm beer. And so when I did get home, I had saved a little money, so my dad said, hey Vern, over at Witt Buick there, you can get a brand new Buick for $1,900, 1952, and the 53s were out then, so that's what I got. And then I worked at Continental Motors for 10 years, and I got to be like a pro bowler, and so I started running bowling alleys, and then I ended up working at the Brunswick.
Well, how about that?
And I retired from the Brunswick.
Well, it's a great corporation, you know, really set a trademark here. So let me talk a little bit about, you know, the branch of service you served in was the Army, but you kind of had a particular opportunity to discover more terrain and see more than the average soldier did back then, didn't you?
Yes. Yeah, once in a while we'd go to the rear to Seoul and for a meeting with the 8th Army headquarters. So I would take the colonel there, and then the next day we'd stay there one day, and the next day we'd go back to the front lines again. And so we seen a lot in Korea, in South Korea for sure. you can't stand there without seeing a mountain, at least one mountain. You could never see flat land like in Michigan or Indiana or something like that. So it was all, and of course the roads were bad, and we had to go up and down the mountains to get to the front lines. And I spent most of the time in North Korea, above the 38th parallel, which was a boundary line between South and North Korea. And the line was kind of crooked, and most of the time we were in North Korea. And when I was there, the worst part was kind of over. But I did land at Incheon, not with MacArthur, but after MacArthur. Okay. But luckily there was nobody there, and so we had an easy time landing.
So you got to see some of the terrain that other people wouldn't even know about. Even nowadays, when we think about North Korea, we know nothing about it, but you've been on the ground. So being the driver and working in that capacity, you also had to know how to take care of your Jeep and deal with any kind of repair or emergency that came up, didn't you?
Yes, sir. I did. And one time, I had a few real close scrapes. The one time, the colonel was riding with the general in a Jeep ahead of us, and I was just following. And they went over a little hill, and my Jeep started on fire. For some reason, the motor started on fire. And so I stopped, and I had to put it out, and we didn't really have fire extinguishers in those days. So I took some sand and put the fire out, and there I was alone, and they didn't see that I was in trouble, so they kept going, and so I was there, and and I was a little being alone, and I knew there probably could be snipers in the mountains there, and so I decided, with God's help, I decided to walk. So I started off walking, and then all of a sudden, behind me, I heard a Jeep coming, or I heard something coming. It was a Jeep, and it just luckily it happened to be a guy from the Signal Corps, and I was a young guy then. I didn't know much about motors, but somehow he wired that up so I could drive it.
How about that?
Now I don't know if he was an angel or what, but I don't know how. I couldn't understand how he could put a wire from the ignition to wherever he did, and I could drive it. And so that was one of my experiences. Yeah.
So are there folks that you've, other men that you've developed a friendship with through the years, not only from Michigan, but even from other states like the Oklahoma group that you work with?
Yeah. Well, one of my best buddies was from Taunton, Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. And when I was bowling once out in Syracuse, I went from Syracuse to Massachusetts to visit him. And that's when we were young. That was about 1954, about a couple of years after. And then when I got married in 1960, my wife and I went on our honeymoon to New England, and we stopped and seen him. And